In this video, we're going to look at the Spanish verbs tener versus haber. At first glance, this topic can seem quite challenging because both tener and haber can mean to have in English. In fact, one of my earliest memories of starting to learn Spanish was writing out a set of flashcards that had tener on one side, to have on the other, and then another flashcard that had haber on one side and to have on the other. And I remember looking at these two flashcards and thinking, what on earth is the difference between these two verbs? And how am I going to memorize them? Well, in this video, we're going to look at when to use tener and when to use haber, and how context plays a huge role for deciding when to use each of these two verbs. In addition, this is also an interesting topic because for beginners, it's going to seem difficult. For intermediate students, it's going to seem obvious. And for advanced students, it's going to get tricky again because there are a few situations where these verbs are kind of interchangeable. In fact, at Real Fast Spanish, in terms of our main courses in our Spanish school, we look at tener and haber in quite a lot of detail in our level 1 course, El Viajero, and then we don't look at it again until our level 4 course, El Técnico. This is because beginners and intermediate students don't really need to know about the advanced part of this topic. They only really need to know about the important fundamentals. So that's what we'll focus on in this video. So starting with tener. We need to use tener whenever we want to talk about possession or ownership. Whenever you want to say, I have something in my possession. I have a ticket for the show. I have a new book that I'm reading. It's okay. I already have a pen. Then in all of these situations, we need to use tener. Now in terms of the conjugations, we have I have, tengo. You have, tienes. He or she has, tiene. We have, tenemos. They have, tienen. All right, let's look at a few examples. Imagine you're getting ready for going out for a dance or a show or something, and you want to say, I have nothing to wear. I have nothing in my possession to wear. And in Spanish, we might say, I have nothing to put on. This would be, no tengo nada que ponerme. No tengo nada que ponerme.
No tengo nada que ponerme.
Now, the next example is one of my favorite expressions in Spanish. It's a wonderful thing to say if someone asks you a question. You simply want to say, I have no idea. If they asked you, what time does the train leave, or where do we need to go to buy our tickets, and you simply have no idea what the answer should be, you can say in Spanish, I have no idea. This is no tengo ni idea. Now, what can happen when you're saying this really quickly in Spanish? Whenever you have a word that ends in a vowel and the next word starts in the same vowel, then Spanish natives will tend to say this almost like it's one word. So it'll tend to contract together. So instead of no tengo ni idea, they'll say no tengo ni idea. No tengo ni idea.
No tengo ni idea.
Now, another example of the Spanish verb tener is in a really useful phrase, one of the most common phrases in the Spanish language, and it's one of the first things that I almost always start with when I'm starting with brand new students. And that is the phrase tener que, which means to have to. So a really useful expression in Spanish is to say tengo que, I have to, and then you can follow it with any verb expressing basically something that you have to do. So for example, I have to tell him about the plan. This in Spanish is tengo que decirle del plan. Tengo que decirle del plan.
Tengo que decirle del plan.
Next, let's look at the verb haber and see how it's different to the verb tener. So haber is slightly more complicated than, in fact, most verbs in the Spanish language. This is because it has two separate forms, the impersonal form and the auxiliary form. Now, you don't need to remember these two terms, but you do need to know how to use each of these forms of the verb. So to start to understand this, let's start by looking at the impersonal form first. We need to use the impersonal form of haber for talking about the existence of something without necessarily describing the possession or ownership of that thing. So for example, whenever you want to say, there is something over there. There are a lot of people here. There is food in the oven. There is no time for that. Whenever you want to say a phrase like this with there is or there are, then you're going to need the impersonal form of haber. In terms of the conjugations of the impersonal form, there's really only one form. There is, there are, hay. Now in terms of pronunciation, it's really important to remember that H's in Spanish are silent. And so to pronounce this word properly, you can forget about the H and you can just simply think of this word as a combination of the Spanish vowel a and the Spanish vowel I, but said in one syllable really quickly. So you can start with a, I, and then say it really quickly. Ay. Ay. All right, let's look at a few examples. Imagine someone was rummaging around and they've found a poster and they found something next to it that they don't recognize. They might say something like, there is another poster, but what is this? This in Spanish would be, hay otro cartel, pero esto, ¿qué es? Hay otro cartel, pero esto qué es?
Hay otro cartel, pero ¿esto de qué es?
All right, another example. Imagine you were trying to get everyone to be serious and they were just sort of messing around. You want to say something like, there is nothing to celebrate. This in Spanish would be, no hay nada que celebrar. No hay nada que celebrar.
No hay nada que celebrar.
Another example, imagine you were talking about making music and you wanted to say something along the lines of, there is a lot of music that gets made in this way or gets made through this method or this path. This in Spanish would be, hay mucha música hecha por ese camino. Hay mucha música hecha por ese camino.
Y hay mucha música hecha por ese camino.
All right, now the next example that I want to share with you is a little bit more difficult because it's harder to translate between English and Spanish, but it was a wonderful example and I really wanted to share it with you. So imagine someone was talking about their process for packing on a holiday and they want to say something along the lines of like, it is always going to be disorderly because disorderly is the way things are, or that's what you're going to get. So in Spanish, the example would be, va a ser en desorden porque desorden es lo que hay. Va a ser en desorden porque desorden es lo que hay.
Va a ser en desorden porque desorden es lo que hay.
Now this last part is kind of hard to translate, but it's really worth stopping and taking a look at it. So if we look at the last part, it's es lo que hay. Now literally in English this would be, it is that which there is, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but we could simplify lo que into what. So it is what there is, or it is what there will be. So disorder is what there will be, or even more natural in English is probably to say disorder is what you will get, right? So sometimes when talking in general, in the abstract, in Spanish, we can use a phrase like hay, whereas in English we need to say is what you get or what you might find. In Spanish, you'll just say that's what there is. Right? Es lo que hay. A little bit difficult to translate, but worth taking a look because this is a really common phrase in Spanish. Next, let's look at the auxiliary form of haber. We need to use the auxiliary form of haber for talking about completed actions in the past. In fact, this form of haber is actually part of a commonly used tense in Spanish known as el pretérito perfecto, or in English, the present perfect tense. Whenever you want to say, I have finished, I have started, I have eaten, I have never tried that, then in Spanish we need to use this auxiliary form of haber. Now this form is almost always combined with a past participle, and one of the most commonly occurring past participles in the Spanish language is dicho, which in English means said. So in phrases such as I have said what I had to say, or I have never said that, or has he said I love you? This might be an interesting question to ask someone. To look at the conjugations of this auxiliary form of haber, we're just going to use dicho as a form of demonstrating how it works. So now we can look at the conjugations. So we have, I have said, he dicho. You have said, has dicho. He or she has said, ha dicho. We have said, hemos dicho. They have said, han dicho. Where again, has, ha, hemos, han are all a translation of I have, you have, we have, they have, etc. Now with my experience of teaching this topic in the past, often there'll be a few questions that students will ask about the difference between I said and I have said, and whether they can both be the translation of he dicho. And the short answer is yes, but it is still a big topic that I will need a separate video to explain all of the focus points and the NDBs. And if you watch my last video on este versus esta versus esto, you'll know what these terms are referring to. If you haven't watched that video, please watch it. I'll leave a link in the sidebar and in the notes section below. Okay, now let's look at a few examples of the auxiliary form of haber. So a really wonderful use And common use of this form of haber is to ask someone if they have ever done something, if they have seen something, or in this first example, if they have learnt something. So a really useful question that you might want to ask someone in Spanish after they did something strange would be, what have you learnt? This in Spanish would be, ¿qué has aprendido? ¿Qué has aprendido?
¿Qué has aprendido?
Now another example, imagine you were describing something that you had done recently. You were organizing something for someone and you wanted to say, I have made a couple of phone calls. This in Spanish would be, he hecho un par de llamadas. And remember from earlier, because H's are silent and we have the e and the hecho, those two e sounds are going to come together because H's are silent. Instead of he hecho, it will simply be hecho un par de llamadas. Hecho un par de llamadas.
He hecho un par de llamadas.
All right, and the next example I think is a wonderful example to demonstrate both tener and haber in the same sentence. So if you can understand this next sentence, you will really get a good solid grasp of this topic. So what we can do is we combine I have in terms of a past tense with ownership. So I used to have in my possession, or I have had in my possession something. So for this example, it's going to be, I have had the good fortune, or I have had the opportunity to be able to be an entrepreneur. This in Spanish is, yo he tenido la fortuna de poder ser emprendedor. Yo he tenido la fortuna de poder ser emprendedor.
Yo he tenido la fortuna de poder ser emprendedor.
All right, so do you have any questions? Is there anything else you would like to know about this topic? If so, please leave a comment below to let me know. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a like. And if you're not already subscribed, then please subscribe. Also, if you want more tips like this, we have a weekly newsletter called Español de la Semana. To sign up for the weekly newsletter, I'll leave a link below in the description. So thanks so much for watching. Gracias por ver. And until next time, habla mejor, entiende más.